Okay, so welcome to TG2Chat Live, the live stream of teachers going gradeless. In today's episode, we have Starr Sackstein joining us. Starr is the Chief Operating Officer of Mastery Portfolio. She is a nationally board certified teacher, author of multiple books, including Hacking Assessment, 10 Ways to Go Gradeless in a Traditional Grade School. And her latest book is Assessing with Respect, Everyday Practices that Meet Students' Social and Emotional Needs. Starr is also an ASCD emerging leader. Starr, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to have you with me.
Morning, Aaron. I'm so excited too. Thanks for waking up so early to accommodate my early hours here.
Oh, no problem at all. So I want to talk about your latest book, which I really enjoyed. It takes this aspect of social emotional learning and ties it in with our assessment practices, which I think is such an important concept right now. Anyways, you start your latest book, Assessing with Respect, by discussing the importance of relationships. So what kind of relationships are important to build with students, and how do they positively impact student learning?
So when we think about kids as whole people, and school is an opportunity to help develop students as well-rounded human beings, that starts with how well we know them, and not just the teacher-student relationship, but building atmospheres and environments that really allow for students to develop rich relationships with each other, and also help them develop relationships with the school community so that everyone could be their best selves as they're going through the learning experience. And I think when we first get into school, instead of focusing heavily, as I'm sure a lot of folks are not doing this year, focusing heavily on, going through the rules and the rituals and routines, we really need to spend time building relationships, getting to know our kids, what they like, what their best modes of learning are. And if they don't know that about themselves yet, giving them opportunities to learn a little bit about how they best learn so that they could start articulating how best they want to be taught, so that the environments are rich with, ways that make them feel honored. And what I've learned is the better we know them, the better we're able to adjust our instructional practices to ensure that they get what they need.
Okay. And, in your book, you give some examples of ways that we build relationships from even before when the students enter the classroom for the first time to that first day and beyond. Could you provide some examples that would help teachers start building positive relationships?
So I'm really big on welcome letters. Even with my 12th graders, I was sending home a welcome letter well before the beginning of the school year. And the book has examples of what an elementary letter might look like, what a middle school letter might look like, and what a high school letter might look like. And obviously, if folks are going to be doing an alternative means of assessing than parents are expecting, it's also an opportunity to kind of rip the Band-Aid off before the year gets started and kind of preempt some questions they might have about the different ways this class is going to look from other classes. But it also it creates an opportunity for us to extend an open door to anybody who would like to ask questions. So in my welcome letters, I always sort of tried to tell them the importance of senior year beyond the fact that it's right before they graduate, but that rigorous learning was really still very important, even though, they might feel like they were petering out a little bit at this point. Other ways that we could do it is to build different activities into the first week of school. I used to like to find someone who, even if you're in a very small school where kids have known each other for a really long time, trying to ask questions that went a little deeper than schools, like just what you would typically learn from folks in school, so that we could kind of get a broad understanding of what kids cared about and how that could start being a part of what we do in class. So those are a couple of examples of things that are talked about in the book.
Okay. Yeah, those are great ways. I always like doing like get to know you activities. Like, we'll have like 3 questions that we have to answer. What's your favorite food? What's your favorite color? And, some other favorites. And then they just kind of go around and introduce each other. But yeah, building those positive relationships and is a lot of fun, and it builds those relationships at the beginning of the school year.
Absolutely.
You continue to place a lot of emphasis on formative feedback in your book too, and this is part of your whole career too, is the formative feedback. So how do you define formative feedback, first of all, and why is it important?
So I think that there's a lot of misconception between what formative learning is versus what summative learning is. And a lot of folks will assess things that are formative and apply a grade to it, which in my understanding, once we apply a grade to it, is no longer formative. Formative is practice work. It's opportunities for kids to get feedback all along the way while they're working. So it's like, if we could use sports terminology, it's like if a kid is at bat, for example, and we notice that the elbow needs to come up a little more while they're getting ready to swing, we're in there coaching them to lift their elbow up, kind of get their arm ready for, keep their eye on the ball. Those would all be formative pieces before they're going to take that swing. And whether you're working with kids in social studies, math, science, or writing or whatever, it's all of the pieces that lead up to where they're going to demonstrate their understanding. So as a writing teacher, it's, having them turn in drafts, providing feedback, giving them opportunities to work with peers and get feedback there and make revisions, all without the evaluative aspect of what's going on. So formative feedback is the feedback on the practice so that they continue to develop before they're summatively assessed.
I love that you use a sports analogy. As a golf coach, that has really shaped me as a teacher, because through the season, everything I do is formative feedback until they put that last hole or ball in the hole at the end of the season. And then we just kind of reflect and we look at what we've accomplished throughout the season, the amount of growth. And I think that's what shaped me the most as a teacher, is seeing how I coach and now applying that to my classroom. So what are some ways that that teachers can use formative feedback to help students develop and create more equity in their classroom?
So for me, the feedback loop is actually where we get the most differentiation, bang for the buck, because you're looking at somebody's individual work, and then you could provide strategic feedback to individual students based on their areas of need. And this is one of the major things that I shifted in my career, probably 5 or 6 years in, because in the beginning, I think that I had like a list of things that I was looking for from the rubric, and where the students started didn't really matter so much as whether or not they met my benchmark. And I was looking for specific things and giving feedback that aligned with the specific things I was looking for. And the major shift kind of happened, like what you were saying with reflection, Erin, is like bringing reflection into the process so that I knew what student goals were, what specific things they were working on. And then when I would read their paper through their lens, or I would look at their project through their own lens, I was better able to give feedback that aligned with what they were working on. So in terms of equity, if every kid has a voice in our room and they're able to articulate the specific goals that they're working on, and we know that through their reflection and the different parts of what we're doing in class, we're able to give better feedback that aligns with the specific things that each individual child is working on. And then if it's during the formative process, it's also going to help us really think about how we do our instruction. Perhaps we give an exit ticket at the end of a lesson thinking that we're going to be moving on to a topic the next day, but learn that there are a good portion of kids who are not ready to move on yet. We have an opportunity to kind of halt where we are, do a reteach in a different way. And then for the kids who did get it, create a small group so that they're still moving ahead at the way that they need to. And I love that image that is all over the internet with what equity essentially is, where kids are all standing on different size boxes so that they could see the field the same way. It's every kid getting what they need instead of kind of just giving every kid the exact same thing as equity. And Rick Wormeli talks a lot about it, and fair isn't always equal. In this idea that, we need to know our kids so that we could give each kid exactly what he needs. And he or she or they are going to all need different things. So we need to make sure we know what they need so that we can provide each child with what they need and move on from there.
I love one of the things that I love that Rick Wormeli says is we don't deny kids glasses.
Nope.
So why don't we deny them? Why do we deny them other things? That is just brutal that we have no problem giving kids glasses, but we have problems giving kids other tools that they need to be successful. And for me, as a father of two boys who are on the autism spectrum, this just, my boys are completely different in their access points and their starting points. And my students, big spectrum of their starting point. So I really appreciate that you brought up the concept that not all kids have the same starting points, and that our goal isn't to get them all to the same ending point. It's to get them to grow from that starting point and move them as far along that as we can.
And it's interesting, Aaron, that you should bring that up, because my son was designated gifted years ago. However, people hear that label and they assume one thing, right? And I think when we see kids are really smart, there's like the social emotional piece is really big for me because of that. My son, although very bright academically, struggles socially a lot. And teachers, because he sounds really smart, tend to forget that he's still a 15-year-old boy who does not deal with failure well, does not deal with negative, like emotionally, he cannot deal with some of the challenges that we would just say, get over it about. It's not that easy. For some kids who are on the gifted side of things, either like there is a wide range of challenges that come with students on every area of the spectrum, whether they're labeled, unlabeled, or whatever. And I think that as educators, it's so important for us to understand that, every child reacts and responds to things in different ways, and knowing their starting point, knowing what kind of feedback is going to resonate for them so that they can move forward is a huge part of what we need to be doing more of.
And that goes back to the idea of building relationships with our kids. We have to know our kids in order to do that, to differentiate for every student.
Yep, absolutely.
So you develop in your book, you spend quite a bit of time on this concept of dispositional skills. So I want you to define dispositional skills for our viewers. What are they and why are they important to learn?
So dispositional skills are, they used to be called habits of mind. Costa talks about it in his book, which is what's mostly referenced in the book as well. And Dr. Paul Bloomberg wrote a whole bunch of stuff about how we develop dispositional skills in students. But it's essentially the stuff that we keep separate from academic learning. It's helping students understand other perspectives. It's building empathy in kids. It's teaching them how to reflect and be metacognitive. It's all of these different things that help them become better learners, but aren't actually about academics. It also makes them be better people as far as I could see. And there are ways that schools could work hard to develop dispositions in kids, and at the same time acknowledge that students are very strong in a lot of dispositions that don't necessarily have to do with school, or they don't think of them the same way. Thinking in terms of like gamification and the whole idea of leveling up and the perseverance and grit. I mean, those are all dispositions, teaching kids to stick to something even when it's not easy or pleasant. And I see students who give up really easily in class, but if we hand them the newest version of a game that they love to play, they'll play for hours, even if they fail over and over again to try to level up. So in thinking about even that formative process and the idea of leveling up, that's exactly what it is, giving them the tools to deal with the failure when it's happening and help them understand that failure is a part of the process. And when we think about what kids need and what their trigger points are, if we could help them develop dispositions and apply them to academic settings, they will be able to better cope with successes and challenges they experience throughout the process, as well as be able to empathize better with peers and other circumstances that might not be things they experience directly.
Yeah, I came across a few years ago a rubric published by I think it was University of Colorado, but it was a soft skills rubric that dealt with things like collaboration, leadership skills, and all these other things. And after discovering that, I thought I'm going to start using this, and now I'm spending more time working on developing kids as individual leaders and kids who take on individual responsibility in my classroom. And I find that far more important than whether they know Beowulf or not, because it's those skills that are going to last a lifetime. And your son obviously needs to develop his confidence. He needs to learn to develop his ability to work with other people. And that's what good teachers do. We help kids to become future leaders and engaged citizens.
Right. Well, I mean, that's also how we develop a culture of belonging in our spaces. John Cranapple and Floyd Cobb talk a lot about it in their book. I think it's called not building, I don't know why, developing a culture of dignity through belonging. I can't believe I don't remember it directly right now. But the whole idea that kids need to feel like they belong, and that belonging piece is, I think, a part of the dispositional piece as well, when we create environments where students are accepting of other perspectives and they can be empathetic to other kids' experiences. And they can also see themselves clearly through the metacognitive process. I think all of those things go together to develop a rich culture of belonging in a classroom and a school when we're all in it together. And that's a part of what's happening in our learning spaces. And developing those leadership skills is huge. And if folks are using, project-based learning or problem-based learning, that's a great way to develop collaboration and develop different ways to develop leadership in the space as well.
So, you talked about project-based learning and problem-based learning, and those really tie in and are easily done through like the humanities classes, and tying in a lot of these SEL dispositional skills come easily with language arts classrooms, because we're looking at literature and we're looking at history and we're looking at things and the way that they impact people. However, the sciences, math, things that are not in the humanities. What are some ways that teachers who are not in the humanities area, what are some ways that they can help build those dispositional skills?
See, and for me, I think the class that suits this the most is science. There's so much exploration to do in the world. And when we think about lab sciences in particular, when kids have to create hypotheses and then go out and test things, it is the very definition of what, project-based learning really is about, going into the world and exploring things. So I think for science, it's more of that inquiry model. And I think in math too, when we think in terms of the science and engineering practices and math practices, those are all dispositional skills we're trying, habits we're trying to develop in kids as they also acquire the math skills and the science skills that they have together. Lori Cook is this amazing math consultant that I used to work with, and she, the way that she approaches math isn't your, drill and kill model so much as making the learning very applicable to student life and really showing them how to apply math while they're learning concepts at the same time. And I think that there are plenty of projects that include, if we're learning geometry, for example, schematics of some kind where, they're looking at blueprints or trying to design something based on a certain amount of materials that they have and what they need to create at the end, and then actually having to create those things. So I think it's just a matter of kind of taking our traditional schooling hat off and really trying to think about ways to engage students in content that is also very connected to their lives. And math and science, there's tons of stuff that we use for math and science every day that I think most kids just don't connect with because it's not the same as it is in a textbook.
I love that you bring up the whole project-based piece of math, that it should be kind of where we're taking students. I've heard some really cool projects, like one of them, you brought in the geometry, giving kids a room and saying, you are a designer. You're going to need to redesign this whole room with carpet, furniture, and wall covering, whatever that's going to be, paint or wallpaper, new drapes. You're going to have to cover all that. You need to make sure that you have enough. So you have to have 10% more than what you need. And you got to keep within the budget. And here's your budget, and it needs to look nice. And we're going to judge these at the end. And if it doesn't look nice and you were under budget, well, guess what you need to do? If it's too expensive, guess what you need to do? And so it gives kids not to solve the equation correctly, but it's to use those correct answers of the equation to solve problems that don't have a right answer.
Right.
So I love that idea. I just think that that's the direction that's where we need to be going in mathematics. And there's so many ways to do that. So in your book, you spend some time discussing how students can establish their own learning goals. And I love this idea. How can we help our students set their own learning goals? And how do we use them as teachers throughout the process and also at that summative time?
So goal setting is a really important part of learning. And my good friend Isaac Wells actually even writes in the book about how we could teach kids who are in kindergarten and first grade how to set really good goals. And we model for the first month or so what goal setting looks like. And modeling is a big part of all the work that we do, but being super intentional about kind of thinking aloud about how we're going to set goals. And when teachers are providing feedback for that first month, even just talking about how the feedback becomes goals that individual kids set, and then having them track their own goals. And the way that I've always used reflection in the classroom is that they're then talking about their specific goals in the reflection. They're talking about the strategies that were provided throughout the formative process. And then also making sure that there are opportunities for me to then give them the feedback that aligns with their specific goals, which I kind of alluded to earlier. Like if I know a student is working on something specific, like maybe I have one student who's struggling with organization in their writing, then the kind of targeted feedback I'm going to give them based on my understanding of what they're working on is either going to be validating what I know they've done or providing more feedback in that space. Instead of, focusing on 10 other things I could be focusing on, it really helps me zero in to the kind of energy I need to be giving to their learning so that their goals are being met. They're getting feedback on the specific goals they've set. And we could kind of work together to decide whether or not they've reached the goal, and then decide if new goals need to be set or if we need to continue working on the same ones. And I think it's a natural way to differentiate. If you're in a high school classroom and you have 34 students, like I used to in New York City public schools, every one of those kids needs something different at different times. So teaching them to articulate what they need in their goals gives me an opportunity to help each and every one of them better at each opportunity along the way. And it's not a blanket sort of like every kid is working on this right now. And the workshop model with project-based learning is also just a very good way to build dispositional skills and content knowledge skills and keep them curious and, engaged in the inquiry process, regardless of what content area that you teach in.
Yeah. One of the things I like to do with my kids is after the first project that we do, I'll have them set their own individual learning goals. I'll have them reflect on what they've done and say, okay, so I want you to set some goals and I'm going to hold you accountable throughout the rest of the semester. And I keep track of these goals. I'll conference with kids. I'll say, how are you doing with X? And some of these kids, I just want to get better at capitalization. Others, I want to be a better team leader. I don't want to just take over projects anymore. I think that is a really cool thing to do with kids. It really puts them in the driver's seat of their learning.
Yep. And I think it also gives us an opportunity to show them that we value their voice in the process, because if we're allowing them to set a goal that's important to them in alignment with the content and skills we need to be teaching, and then we very specifically provide them feedback on those goals, they're seeing us practice the things that we're preaching. By giving them voice and choice, we're literally letting them select how they engage with the content we're presenting.
Yeah, and I like doing it after the first project in a short piece that I do, not before, like in the first day of school, because I think there's this anxiety. Get them into this project, have them have some fun, see where they currently are, and then self-assess their work and then set those goals.
I also think that the kids don't know. I mean, unless you're in a district or a building that does this wholesale, where they're being taught very early on how to set goals and how to reflect and how to do those things, that it's not an innate thing that kids come to us knowing how to do. So unfortunately, when I was teaching 12th graders, sometimes I was the first time this was happening for them, going way back to when I first started doing this work. And a lot of my students didn't know how to reflect, and they didn't even know how to think about themselves as learners, because they had been pushed through a system for so long that just expected them to comply.
Right.
So, it does take a fair amount of modeling and being explicit in the teaching in that first month, where you're modeling how to give feedback, modeling how to set goals, and then how to track progress on those goals to determine whether or not they were successfully met.
Right. And not all kids can do this even innately. Like my son, who is going into his junior year of high school, he has so much anxiety. If you were just asked him point blank, what's something that you want to develop, he'd shut down. But if you scaffolded out for my son, who's going to be 17 soon, he'll pick a goal and he'll really work on that goal. But yeah, we have to honor that some kids need that scaffolding or need a list of items to create goals, but also be free enough for those other students to be able to identify their own goals that are not on that list or something we never thought about.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the whole idea of the UDL idea of learning, having those options available I think this is a mindset shift for educators. Providing kids scaffolds and helping them to get to their end goal in no way is dumbing things down or watering things down. It's teaching kids to access different supports that are there, not prescribing which one is the best one for them to use, but saying, here's what you have to support yourself through these things. Use what you need so you could be successful, in teaching them to do that. And one of the Facebook folks said about their son being the same, and anxiety is the same for my son as well, who's also going into his junior year, and he has panic attacks. When and it's scary to be on the other side of that, watching him go through it, knowing that there's really nothing we can do to help them out of that except be supportive and give them the space that they need to calm down. Without diminishing the fears and the anxiety that they feel, Yeah.
Well, I think this ties into the last question really, really well, because ultimately what we want our students to become self-aware and take responsibility for their own learning, whether that is time management, organization, self-advocacy, or whatever. But we can't expect every student to be able to come into our classroom with these skills. They need to be taught this, whether they're a kindergartner or a senior in high school, they need to be taught these skills. So what are some strategies that will help that teachers can use to help students develop these skills in order for them to become responsible citizens?
So I think a big part of this one is just making sure, first of all, that we're super clear. Clarity, Hattie says that clarity is one of the highest, teacher clarity and student clarity get you some of the highest impact for a year of teaching, that level of effect size. And thinking about, having really clear standards aligned learning targets, using the language of the skills you want kids to be using in your spaces, co-constructing success criteria so kids know before they start what success is going to look like. And then, whether that's providing them exemplars and kind of breaking them down, doing a lot of front loading so that when they are going through the process, they know how to ask for the kind of help that they need, because we've already broken down what we're looking for in the assignment. They understand transparently why we're doing the learning that we're doing. And that piece of being able to clearly discuss where their struggle is. Like, how many of us in a classroom has had a student come up to us and plop a full paper in front of us, a full draft, and say, is this good? That is a very complicated, vague question that is very hard to answer quickly, especially because I don't really know what kids are really asking me. And if I have 33 other students to serve in the class, reading an 8-page paper in the middle of class is not something that is going to really be time effective. So giving kids the vocabulary to know exactly what they need to ask so that I could give them the actual answer that they're looking for is a huge part of what's going on. And again, it's using vocabulary that you determine that's both student facing, but also tied to that academic vocabulary, and giving them the language to be able to ask for what they need. Reflection, portfolio, all these different ways for them to actually see progress over time, like literally see it, and be able to track it through their goal setting and the steps that they're taking and the strategies and the kind of outcomes those strategies promote, is also another really important way that we could make sure that kids are getting what they need throughout the process.
Yeah. I love that you bring up this idea of a kid coming up to you and saying, is this good? I mean, I've been asked that, of course, many, many times myself. And I remember one time, it was fantastic. I had this young lady bring up an essay. The prompt for the essay was develop an argument of why you like either, a TV show, a movie, a video game, whatever. And so she wrote this essay on a video game, and it talks, the beginning, it talks about the history of the video game, the way it was made, and talks about the graphics in it and how much money was spent in it. And I read it and I looked at her and said, why do you like this video game? And she goes, well, it's fun to play. The graphics are super engaging. I love the storyline. I said, your essay says nothing about that. So you tell me if this is good. She looked at it, grabbed it, crumbled it up, threw it away, said, I'm going to go write a better essay. Oh. And I think that is so important, is that, first of all, getting to know our kids, but being able to ask those questions when they come to us and say, is this good? Ask, well, is this something that you think is good, and finding ways to address that. But yeah, we need to teach our kids to self-advocate and have those tools to develop. And portfolios are a fantastic way to do that and give students voice in what goes into those portfolios and the outcome of those portfolios too.
Yep. I mean, I think we also have to be spending time teaching kids that progress is what matters, and not, like when we de-emphasize grades, and I know you're on the same page with me about this, but I'm hoping that when folks read Assessing with Respect, they get the big picture that when we're looking at kids, labeling them, sometimes really changes the way they see themselves. So if we want them to be able to understand what's good to them and feel confident enough to stand by their own answers and stand by the work that they do, so that if we push back a lot, and as a 12th grade, English teacher, when I'm giving kids feedback on their writing, for example, and this is something I've always kind of struggled with, like, my feedback isn't the only feedback. You are the author of the work that you're creating, and you ultimately have the authorial power to make a choice about what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. And as long as you can speak to why you made the choices you made, far be it from me to change your voice in the way that you're writing something. And I think that if we want to create more thoughtful, creative writers, even in academic writing, we have to teach kids to feel confident about the choices they make, and give them tools to understand that, especially in creative endeavors, there's no one right way to do it. And I can offer you suggestions as a reader about how things may be clear to me or not clear to me. But at the end of the day, the way that you present your work is your choice. And, there are some nuts and bolts things that are about right. But once you're an adept writer, how many times do adept writers break all the rules? So you just need to know what you're doing when you make those choices.
Well, Starr, thank you so much for spending your morning with me. I do appreciate it. And I want to encourage our audience to check out the book, Assessing with Respect. It is a phenomenal book. It really does tie in the idea of how our assessment practices intersect with social and emotional learning. I've been reading it. It's fantastic. Can't give it the praise it deserves. But I want to thank you for writing that book, and thank you for joining us today. I want to encourage our audience to support us. Our efforts here at TG2 is to help teachers grow beyond grades, and it's with the help of our audience members, through our Patreon, that we are able to do what we do. At this time, I want to thank some of our supporters: Mark Phillips, Dina Lau, Corin Clever, Brian Arnott, and Skylar Prim, for their generous support of TG2. And I want to encourage you to check out our Patreon page and support us. So Starr, what's next for you, and how can people connect with you?
So I'm currently working with Mastery Portfolio, and who we are is a company that helps teachers and schools communicate mastery learning. That's what we do. So our mastery book is all about taking the practices that we're talking about here and very practically tracking student learning in a way that is easier than, I know that when I was trying to navigate the specific system, the LMS that my school was using, I had to find a lot of hacks to kind of get around having to average everything that I put in, putting a grade with everything. So that's what I'm doing right now, helping schools communicate mastery learning better, which is what I've been doing for, the last more than a decade now, which is kind of scary. And I am always reachable on social media at Miss Sackstein, on my website. And if you read anything I've ever written and you reach out to me, I really do make it a point to get back to people. So if you have questions, lingering questions, or you just are having an issue, I recommend, the Facebook page, the TG2 Facebook page, as well as the Teachers Throwing Out Grades Facebook page. There's huge communities around this now. You don't have to be the only teacher in your school who's doing it. You could have support from others. And I would recommend using that support of folks who have kind of gone before you if you're just entering into this concept now.
Yeah. Well, Starr, thanks again for being with me today, and I want to thank our viewers for joining us. Please stay tuned for future installments of TG2Chat Live. We are signing out.
Bye, everyone.